fundamentally most of our education offerings in New Zealand are based on a completely outdated, outmoded model of education which came from England, the Cambridge University model, which was designed to take rich men's sons and put them into Parliament or into the church. So this is not a model that's going to serve us, in what we need to offer people, in the things we need people to learn and understand to improve our outcomes going forward as a world, as people. I'm going around in circles, I know. I am going to get to a point. When we started looking at what we can do to improve outcomes, and in particular, one of the things that Diana said was we don't talk about improving outcomes specifically for Māori, or we're not allowed to say we're going to focus on Māori in government. It's been interesting at the Commission because one of the things we specifically are doing is saying very, very clearly, and this is in our Minister's Letter of Expectation, and this is in the Tertiary Education Strategy, is we need to improve educational outcomes for Māori and Pacific and disabled people. And those are the three groups that the Minister has specifically named. But we are also looking at other underserved learner groups that I'm sure you can think of in your own minds, and the intersectionality of those groupings as well. So when we started looking at what was happening in the system, we could see really clearly, and I am not telling you anything you don't know, that even though educational outcomes overall were improving for New Zealanders, that the disparity in outcomes for non-Māori and Pacific learners and Māori and Pacific learners sat really static. So we've got this kind of horrible gap that you're all aware of people can access, they can participate, they can achieve, but we're just getting this big percentage gap between non-Māori and Pacific and Māori and Pacific learners in most spaces. Programs are great. People love programs that target specific learner groups, but what we could see really clearly in 20 years of data is that programs, a programmatic response to target a specific learner group, doesn't work in a system, and we're failing our learners when we think that that is our solution. So what we've done over the last few years is we have looked at what's happening internationally and where successes have been achieved, where people have radically turned around higher education offerings to make the outcomes that people are receiving show complete parity across groups. Doesn't matter where you came from, doesn't matter if you're low income or you're from a different ethnic background or you identify as rainbow, you're going to achieve at the same as everybody else. So we looked at what's been done overseas, and so we picked up a model from overseas, brought it back to New Zealand, did the work to make it appropriate for our culture, our environment, and our scale of education. We call it the learner success approach. If you've heard a lot about this before, I apologise. But what it does is it fundamentally requires all tertiary education organisations to place the learner at the centre. Now, speaking to this audience, you're like, well, obviously. But this is actually sadly not the case for a lot of the way our educational institutions in the tertiary space have functioned. Universities traditionally, they're not about placing the learner at the centre. They're about lots of things, but it's not about placing the learner at the centre, especially not someone who's a first year student in a class of 200 people. So for your kind of sector and for the foundation education space in particular, this poses far less of a challenge. It's not rocket science, but please believe me when I say for other parts of our sector, this is incredibly challenging. So it's a journey. So what it basically requires is that organisations adopt a framework, a learner success framework. It's a continuous improvement framework, and it requires an organisation to fundamentally change the way they operate at every single level. The reason I wanted to dig into that a little bit is because one of the things we've been talking a lot this morning is about being excluded from learning spaces and from how you learn and how people teach. One of the things that the framework requires is for an organisation to look really deeply at how it is addressing teaching, pedagogy and practice. Again, we don't win a lot of awards with universities when we talk to them about maybe they'd like to think about their teaching, pedagogy and practice, because anyway, we had a conversation about that at lunch. One of the things I've found really interesting in this teaching, pedagogy and practice space is the things that are coming out of the people who are doing this really, really well in other parts of the world, working from Indigenous perspectives, working from poverty perspectives, working from colonised perspectives. And they are speaking and working and confronting the systems on things like, who is the expert teacher? How can I be humble as a teacher? How can I co-teach and co-create, which is one of the things Diana spoke about this morning. And how can I open myself to be part of the learning process? They talk about human level engagement. You know, I am not the person standing at the front of the classroom who knows everything, and I will tell you it from my perspective. I will open myself to you and encourage you to be part of this dialogue. So there's a whole lot of really exciting stuff going on. I could talk about that for a long time, or I can direct you to some things if you're interested in it. So effectively, with the learner success approach, we are requiring this of all tertiary education organisations. Our Board of Governors has gone out and spoken to the councils of all the universities, Wānanga and Te Pūkenga, and said, look, this is what we care about the most. The thing we care about the most is that you get on the learner success journey and that we can see that you're doing it and that you're committing time and resource and that you are committing to changing your practice at every level. Don't get me wrong, this includes teaching and academic pedagogy. This is going to be the hardest thing for some of our organisations. I don't think that's going to be a challenge for this part of the sector at all, because you're already doing the kind of things that we need the whole system to do in this space. So TEC will be working with the sector on this. There's a whole lot of information around it. There's a toolkit. The level of funding you receive will depend on how much we are speaking to you about this at the moment, and whether we've asked you for a learner success plan, for example. That's a bit of a broad brush overview. And I wanted to speak just briefly about some of the work we are doing, particularly focused on disability and neurodiversity, to support the learner success work. So one of the things that happens when you dive into being a learner-centric organisation is you do a whole lot of work to understand who your learners are. Again, for this sector, you're like, I know who my learners are, I know their names. Auckland University doesn't know a lot about their learners. You know, they know a little bit. Hopefully, that'll get back to Auckland University. I'll take that up with Pamela. I would challenge a number of our large institutions to tell us that they truly know who their learners are. You know, they have a bit of an idea. They might know how many of them came from Auckland Grammar or how many of them come from South Auckland and that kind of thing. But they do a large piece of data work that involves not only looking at statistics and data to show them how learners have entered, progressed and achieved, but actually doing interviews. And Te Pūkenga have done this, and they've done some ākonga at the centre work, thousands of interviews with learners and teachers, massive data set, and that's enabled them to build up personas and understand where the barriers and enablers are for all their different learner groups, and to start to systematically address those barriers and enablers, you know, improve the enablers, dismantle the barriers. It's not overnight work. It's a multi-year change process, and you start and you move forward. When you understand your learners, one of the things we see immediately happen is people go, oh, I didn't know I had people like that, literally a phrase I've heard, I didn't know we had people like that at our organisation. It's like, well, now you do, that's exciting. But with everyone in the sector, I think, being time poor and needing access to good information, we're creating some capability resources around that. One of the things I would encourage you to have a look at, if you haven't already seen it, is a product called the Kia Ōrite Toolkit, which is a toolkit for best practice for supporting disabled and neurodiverse learners in New Zealand. It's currently 5 large documents because we needed to get it out quite quickly. But it will be around August. By August at the latest, I hope it will be a fully enabled website. It will also have 3 e-learning modules which are designed for people working in tertiary spaces, so staff and teachers who might want to improve their disability confidence. So that work has been done with the Human Rights Commission and the Office of Disability Issues, and we're really pleased that we can make that available. The other work we're doing around neurodiversity is we're working with subject matter expert partners to produce resources. We've provided quite a lot of resource around dyslexia We're just finalising work around dyscalculia. We've got some work coming up around dyspraxia as well. And I'm really pleased to be able to let you know that we have worked with Altogether Autism and ADHD New Zealand to provide specific learning modules around teaching autistic people and people with ADHD in the tertiary education space. They are online, they're free, you can go through learning modules, you can dip in and out and use those as might be useful for your staff or for your tutors and other people. The other thing we've done, and Christine, I'm not sure how many of the ACE organisations the DAPs apply to. Oh, okay, so we've introduced a requirement for all organisations that receive over $5 million TEC funding that they must produce a disability action plan as a condition of that funding. And this is to ensure that within their learner success work they are not losing sight of the fact that disabled and neurodiverse learners make up a big proportion of their learners and are currently pretty invisible to most of them and are really poorly underserved. So a disability action plan is a TEO's commitment to how it will support disabled and neurodiverse learners. It's a strategic long-term plan and they will be monitored and assessed as part of the investment conversations we have with the tertiary organisations. Not required for the majority of your sector, but we would strongly encourage you to have a look at the guidelines which are on the website. If any of you want to go down that journey and do some disability action plan work and look at Kia Ōrite, myself and my colleagues really happy to support you with that, look at any work you produce or connect you with people that can help you with that. Sorry, I feel like that was a sort of scattergun once over lightly, but I just, to loop back, the Commission does understand that there's a systemic problem with a lot of the way that people are offered post-secondary education in this country, and our learner success approach is our really hand-on-heart attempt to try and address this. We're doing it in partnership with you. It's being trialled with different organisations. So we're now into about year 3, but we're still learning and growing. We're establishing a community of practice at the moment, so there's lots of good things happening. I'm going to just finish with this quote that Naomi's mum says, if you aim for nothing, you will achieve nothing. So we're aiming really high with this, but we need to make a difference because the things we've done in the past haven't worked. So this is our aim high, and hopefully we will achieve well. Thank you.